Welcome to Justice Unleashed. You think you can bleed me dry forever, Natasha? Dream on, my ex-husband Cameron sneered, tossing the court papers onto the hood of his gleaming silver Porsche 911 Turbo while our 8-year-old daughter Lily watched from my beaten-up Honda Civic. The courthouse steps echoed with his arrogant laughter as he climbed into his $150,000 sports car, leaving us with nothing but broken promises and an empty bank account. What Cameron didn't know was that those same court papers he'd just dismissed would become the key to seizing everything he thought was untouchable. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Hi everyone, my name is Natasha Rivera, and I'm 34 years old. For 3 years since our divorce, I've been fighting a war I never wanted to fight, the battle to get basic child support from a man who spends more on his monthly car payments than he's ever paid for his own daughter's needs. Cameron Blackstone lives in a $2.3 million mansion in Clearwater Heights, drives luxury cars that cost more than most people's houses, and posts Instagram stories from 5-star restaurants while my daughter asks why daddy won't help buy her school supplies. Standing on those courthouse steps that scorching Tuesday afternoon in downtown Millbrook, watching Cameron's Porsche disappear into traffic, I felt something crack inside my chest. Not break, crack. Like the first fissure in a dam that's been holding back years of frustration, humiliation, and rage. Lily tugged on my sleeve, her small voice cutting through the humid air. Mommy, why doesn't Daddy want to help us? How do you explain to an 8-year-old that her father sees her as an inconvenience rather than a responsibility? How do you tell her that the man who claims to love her has missed 18 months of child support payments while buying a boat he named Freedom from us, apparently? Cameron and I divorced when Lily was 5 after I discovered he'd been siphoning money from our joint accounts to fund his gambling addiction and affair with his secretary, Brianna Walsh. The divorce settlement seemed fair on paper. I got primary custody, he got visitation rights and a $2,800 monthly child support obligation. Simple, clean, reasonable. What wasn't reasonable was Cameron's immediate transformation from absent husband to deadbeat father. The first missed payment came with an excuse about cash flow issues. The second came with promises that he was sorting things out. By month 6, the excuses stopped coming altogether. He simply ignored my calls, blocked my texts, and instructed his lawyer to handle all communication. Meanwhile, Lily needed everything a growing child needs. School clothes that fit her sprouting frame. Dental work when she chipped her front tooth on the playground. Tutoring when she struggled with math. Birthday parties for friends. Summer camp registration. The 1,000 little expenses that make childhood possible and joyful. I work as a pediatric nurse at Millbrook General Hospital, pulling double shifts whenever possible, but even with overtime, my salary barely covers our modest 2-bedroom apartment in Sunset Gardens, groceries, utilities, and Lily's basic needs. Cameron knows this. He knows exactly how his financial abandonment affects us because I've documented every struggle, every missed opportunity, every night Lily went to bed asking why Daddy couldn't help. The irony burns like acid in my throat. While I clip coupons and shop at thrift stores, Cameron posts photos from his weekend in the Hamptons. While I explain to Lily why we can't afford the art classes she desperately wants, he's financing a second luxury car, a red Ferrari California that he bought to celebrate closing a big deal. Cameron owns Blackstone Real Estate Development, a company he inherited from his father, and his lifestyle screams wealth from every perfectly pressed suit to every platinum watch on his wrist. His LinkedIn profile boasts about multi-million-dollar property deals. His social media accounts document a life of excess that would make reality TV stars jealous. But in family court, Cameron transforms into a struggling entrepreneur barely keeping his business afloat. His lawyer, the sharp-tongued Miranda Cross, paints him as a victim of economic hardship who desperately wants to support his daughter but simply cannot afford the court-ordered payments. She presents carefully crafted financial statements showing minimal income and maximum expenses, all designed to justify his continued neglect of Lily's needs. Today's hearing was supposed to be different. I'd hired attorney Jessica Park, a former prosecutor known for her relentless pursuit of deadbeat parents. We'd gathered evidence of Cameron's true financial situation, property records, business filings, bank statements obtained through legal discovery. We were ready for war. Instead, we got a postponement. Judge Harold Fitzgerald, nearing retirement and apparently tired of contentious family disputes, granted Miranda Cross's request for a 60-day extension to allow Cameron time to reorganize his finances and propose a realistic payment plan. 60 more days of Lily asking why Daddy won't help. 60 more days of me explaining why we can't afford things her friends take for granted. 60 more days of Cameron living his best life while shirking his most basic responsibility. But as I watched that silver Porsche disappear into traffic, something crystallized in my mind. Cameron thought he was untouchable, protected by expensive lawyers and legal loopholes. He thought he could outlast me, exhaust my resources, and force me to give up. He had no idea what he'd just unleashed. Because what Cameron didn't know, what his arrogant smirk and dismissive laughter proved he'd never bothered to learn, was that I wasn't just a tired single mother he could intimidate into silence. I was a woman who'd finally stopped asking for fairness and started planning for justice. Let me tell you how I got here, fighting for scraps from a man who once promised to love and protect our family forever. Cameron and I met 7 years ago at a charity gala for the Millbrook Children's Hospital where I worked. He was the handsome donor writing 5-figure checks with casual confidence. I was the nurse who actually saved the kids those checks were supposed to help. He approached me during the silent auction, smooth and charming in his tailored tuxedo, asking intelligent questions about pediatric care that made me think he genuinely cared about something beyond himself. Our courtship was a whirlwind of expensive restaurants, weekend getaways to his family's lake house in Pine Ridge, and thoughtful gestures that made me believe I'd found someone who valued my dedication to helping others. Cameron seemed fascinated by my work, always asking about my patients, supporting my long hours, even donating medical equipment to the hospital in my honor. When Lily was born, Cameron cried actual tears holding her in the delivery room. He hired a professional photographer to capture every moment of her first weeks, bought her a crib that cost more than my monthly salary, and promised he'd always be there for his little princess. For those first few years, he kept that promise. He attended every doctor's appointment, every milestone, every bedtime story. But success has a way of changing people, especially when it comes too easily. Blackstone real estate development exploded during the city's downtown revitalization project. Cameron's inherited connections and natural charisma landed him contracts worth tens of millions. Suddenly, he wasn't just comfortable, he was wealthy beyond anything either of us had imagined. The modest suburban house we'd shared became a sprawling mansion with gates and a circular driveway. His practical sedan became a collection of luxury vehicles that rotated through our garage like expensive toys. At first, the money felt like a blessing. Lily had everything she could want. I could focus on nursing without worrying about bills. We took family vacations to places I'd only seen in magazines. But with the wealth came changes in Cameron that crept in so gradually I didn't notice until they completely transformed him. The man who once rushed home to read Lily bedtime stories started working later and later, claiming important deals required his personal attention. The husband who used to ask about my day began treating my nursing career like an expensive hobby rather than a meaningful profession. "You don't need to work these crazy hours anymore, Natasha," he'd say dismissively. "We have enough money now." But I loved my work. Those sick children needed advocates, not just medical care. And something deep in my gut warned me that depending entirely on Cameron's income was dangerous, though I couldn't articulate why at the time. The gambling started as entertainment. High-stakes poker games with business associates. Trips to Atlantic City that Cameron framed as networking opportunities. Weekend jaunts to Las Vegas for client relationship building. I trusted him because he'd never given me reason not to, and because the money kept flowing in faster than he could spend it. Or so I thought. The affair began sometime during Lily's 4th year, though I wouldn't discover it until months later. Brianna Walsh, his new personal assistant, 26 years old with ambition that matched her stunning looks. She accompanied Cameron to business dinners, weekend conferences, and eventually, romantic getaways that he disguised as work trips. I discovered both secrets the same night, the gambling addiction that had cost us nearly $400,000, and the affair that had cost us our marriage. Lily was sleeping over at my sister Rachel's house in Oakmont when I decided to surprise Cameron with dinner from his favorite restaurant downtown. I found him in our home office at midnight, frantically moving money between accounts while video chatting with Brianna, who was obviously in a hotel room wearing nothing but a sheet. The financial records spread across his desk told a story of systematic deception. Mortgage payments behind by 3 months. Credit cards maxed out to fund his poker losses. Business accounts drained to maintain his lifestyle while hiding his addiction. And payments to Brianna for services that had nothing to do with real estate development. When I confronted him, Cameron didn't deny anything. Instead, he attacked. I was boring. I was judgmental. I didn't understand the pressures of running a business. I should have been grateful for the lifestyle his success provided instead of questioning how he maintained it. "You're just a nurse, Natasha," he said, his voice cold with contempt I'd never heard before. "You have no idea how the real world works." That sentence ended our marriage, though it took 8 more months of counseling, legal battles, and Lily's tearful questions about why Mommy and Daddy fought so much before we made it official. The divorce proceedings revealed just how expertly Cameron had hidden our true financial situation. His lawyer, Miranda Cross, painted a picture of a man struggling to rebuild after gambling losses, deeply remorseful and committed to supporting his family within his limited means. They provided documentation showing the business barely breaking even, personal assets tied up in investments that couldn't be liquidated, and monthly expenses that left little room for substantial child support. Meanwhile, I had to prove my need for support while defending my decision to continue working. Cameron's legal team actually argued that my nursing income was sufficient for Lily's basic needs, and that requesting additional support was simply an attempt to maintain a lifestyle I hadn't earned. Judge Fitzgerald, clearly exhausted by our case, split the difference. Cameron would pay $2,800 monthly, enough to help with Lily's expenses but far less than his actual income could support. The amount was based on the financial picture Miranda Cross had presented, not the reality of Cameron's wealth. For the first few months after our divorce, Cameron made his payments on time. He even took Lily for his scheduled weekend visits, playing the devoted father role convincingly enough that I began to hope we could co-parent successfully despite our personal animosity. But then the payments started coming late. Then smaller than agreed. Then not at all. And I realized that Cameron had never intended to honor his obligations. The payments had been temporary theater designed to avoid legal consequences until he could find a way to escape them entirely. Now, 3 years later, I'm owed $50,400 in unpaid child support while Cameron drives cars worth more than most people's houses and lives in luxury that would make millionaires jealous. But tonight, sitting in my small apartment watching Lily do homework at our second-hand dining table, I'm done being the reasonable ex-wife who believes his lawyer's excuses and accepts his empty promises. It's time Cameron learned that underestimating a pediatric nurse was the biggest mistake of his privileged life. The system Cameron created to avoid his responsibilities was as sophisticated as it was cruel. Every missed payment came with a perfectly crafted excuse delivered through Miranda Cross's law office. Mr. Blackstone's primary investor pulled out of a major development project. Unexpected legal fees from a property dispute have created temporary cash flow issues. Market fluctuations have significantly impacted projected quarterly earnings. Meanwhile, his social media accounts told a completely different story. Just last month, while Miranda was explaining to Judge Fitzgerald that Cameron couldn't afford his full support obligation, he posted photos from a weekend in Napa Valley, complete with $500 bottles of wine and a private helicopter tour. The week before that, it was front row seats at a Broadway show in New York, followed by dinner at a restaurant where appetizers cost more than Lily's weekly grocery budget. But Cameron's cruelest manipulation wasn't financial, it was emotional. He weaponized Lily's love for him as leverage against me, and he did it with surgical precision. Every other Friday, when Lily packed her little overnight bag for weekend visits, Cameron would arrive in whatever luxury car caught his fancy that week. The Porsche, the Ferrari, sometimes the midnight blue Aston Martin he'd acquired during our latest court battle. He'd let Lily sit in the driver's seat, honking the horn and pretending to steer while neighbors watched from their modest driveways. "Daddy, why can't Mommy have a car like this?" she asked me once after returning from his mansion in Clearwater Heights. Cameron had taught her to ask that question. Just like he'd taught her to mention the indoor swimming pool, the home theater, the playroom bigger than our entire apartment. He never directly criticized me to Lily, that would be too obvious. Instead, he created a constant comparison that made our simple life feel inadequate through the eyes of an 8-year-old. During their visits, Cameron showered Lily with expensive gifts and experiences that I could never match on my nursing salary. Designer clothes from boutiques downtown. Electronics that cost more than my monthly rent. Weekend trips to theme parks and exclusive resorts. He documented everything on social media, creating a highlight reel of devoted father moments while ignoring the court orders requiring him to contribute to her daily needs. The psychological manipulation extended to our communication about Lily's welfare. When she needed new school clothes at the beginning of the academic year, I texted Cameron asking for help with the unexpected expense of her growth spurt. His response came through Miranda's office. Mr. Blackstone believes the court-ordered support amount should cover all of Lily's basic clothing needs. He suggests shopping at more budget-friendly retailers. That same week, he bought Lily a $300 designer jacket for their weekend together, then posted photos of her wearing it with the caption, "Nothing's too good for my princess." The message was clear: he could afford to spoil her when it made him look good, but supporting her daily needs was my responsibility alone. The most painful part was watching Lily internalize the dysfunction. She began apologizing for needing things: new shoes when hers wore out, school supplies for projects, lunch money when I'd stretched our grocery budget too thin. My bright, confident daughter was learning to feel guilty for having normal childhood needs because daddy's love came with conditions and mommy's resources had limits. Cameron's business success during this period made his neglect even more infuriating. Blackstone Real Estate Development landed the contract for Harbor Point, a mixed-use development project worth $85 million. Local newspapers featured Cameron in glowing profiles about young entrepreneurs revitalizing downtown Millbrook. The mayor presented him with a Community Leadership Award at a ceremony I watched online, seething as he delivered a speech about investing in our children's future. Yet when Lily needed dental work after falling off her bike, Cameron's lawyer argued that orthodontic care was beyond the scope of basic child support and suggested I apply for medical assistance through the state program for low-income families. I tried everything the system offered. Family court mediation sessions where Miranda would arrive with new financial documents showing Cameron's latest business difficulties, while he posted Instagram stories from luxury ski resorts. Contempt of court motions that resulted in stern warnings but no actual consequences. Phone calls to the state's Child Support Enforcement Office, where overworked case managers would promise to look into it before filing our case away with thousands of others. The breaking point came 6 months ago during Lily's school parent-teacher conference. Mrs. Henderson, her third-grade teacher, gently mentioned that Lily had been asking classmates to share their art supplies because she couldn't afford the premium materials for an upcoming project. The cost was $12. $12 that I didn't have in my checking account because I'd had to choose between Lily's school supplies and keeping our electricity connected. That night, Cameron posted photos from a wine tasting event where bottles cost more than my weekly salary. The caption read, "Life's too short for cheap wine and fake friends." I stared at that post until my eyes burned, thinking about my daughter rationing colored pencils while her father complained about wine quality. The system wasn't broken, it was designed this way. Family courts that moved at glacial pace while children grew up without support. Legal procedures that favored whoever could afford better representation. Enforcement mechanisms that treated contempt of court like a minor inconvenience rather than theft from a child's future. Cameron understood this system perfectly because he'd been raised in privilege that taught him how to manipulate it. His family's connections included judges, lawyers, and politicians who saw him as a successful businessman rather than a deadbeat father. When Miranda Cross argued that garnishing his wages would irreparably damage his business operations, these people nodded sympathetically because they understood protecting wealth, not protecting children. But what Cameron never understood about me was that being a pediatric nurse means fighting for children who can't fight for themselves. Every day, I advocate for kids whose parents can't afford private insurance. I navigate hospital bureaucracies to ensure premature babies get the specialized care they need regardless of their family's financial status. I've held dying children while their parents signed forms they couldn't read because they were too devastated to focus. Fighting for vulnerable children isn't just my job, it's who I am at the cellular level. And Cameron had just made the fatal mistake of assuming that intimidation and legal maneuvering could exhaust my determination to protect my own child. He was about to discover that there's a difference between being patient and being weak, and he'd just crossed that line for the last time. The transformation didn't happen overnight. It began 3 weeks ago when Lily came home from Cameron's weekend visit carrying a gift bag from Tiffany & Company. Inside was a sterling silver bracelet with her initials engraved in elegant script, beautiful, expensive, and completely inappropriate for an 8-year-old who still lost her lunch money twice a week. Daddy said this is what real princesses wear, Lily announced, fastening the delicate chain around her tiny wrist. He said someday I'll understand why some people can afford nice things and others can't. The casual cruelty of that statement, delivered through my innocent daughter's voice, ignited something primal in my chest. Cameron wasn't just stealing money from Lily's future, he was teaching her that love could be purchased and that her mother's sacrifices meant nothing compared to his material gifts. I sat on our second-hand couch that night, watching Lily sleep with the bracelet still on her wrist, and felt something fundamental shift inside my brain. The patient, reasonable Natasha who believed in working within the system was dying, replaced by someone who understood that justice sometimes requires a different approach. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 2 years and drove to the downtown courthouse. Not to file more useless motions or schedule more pointless mediation sessions, but to research. I spent 6 hours in the law library, reading everything I could find about asset seizure, contempt proceedings, and creditors' rights. What I discovered changed everything. Family court judges could issue bench warrants for chronic non-payment of child support. Sheriff's departments could seize assets to satisfy judgment debts. The state could suspend professional licenses for deadbeat parents. Cameron's wealth wasn't actually protected by legal loopholes, the system simply required someone with enough knowledge and determination to use its tools effectively. More importantly, I learned about a legal provision I'd never heard before: immediate asset seizure for debtors who demonstrated willful and flagrant contempt of court orders. If I could prove Cameron was deliberately hiding assets while refusing to pay support, a judge could authorize the sheriff to seize property worth the unpaid amount without the usual lengthy appeals process. I spent that entire week researching Cameron's financial empire with the methodical precision I used to track medication dosages for premature babies. Public records revealed a web of property holdings, business investments, and luxury assets that painted a clear picture of deliberate deception. The silver Porsche 911 Turbo he'd driven to court was registered to Blackstone Holdings LLC, a subsidiary company that existed solely to shield assets from personal liability. The Ferrari California was owned by Cameron Blackstone Investments, another shell entity. Even his primary residence was held in a trust that listed his mother, Patricia Blackstone, as the official owner while Cameron maintained complete control. But shell companies and family trusts aren't impenetrable shields when someone knows how to trace the connections. Every business entity had to file annual reports. Every trust required tax filings. Every asset transfer left paper trails that led back to Cameron's control and ownership. I started documenting everything. Screenshots of his social media posts showing luxury purchases and expensive vacations. Public records of property acquisitions that coincided with his claims of financial hardship. Business filings that revealed income streams his lawyer had never disclosed to the court. The work consumed me. After long shifts at the hospital, I'd come home and research until 2 a.m., building a comprehensive case that demolished Cameron's facade of poverty. Lily would find me surrounded by legal documents and printed spreadsheets, coffee-stained and determined. "Mommy, what are all these papers?" she asked one evening, curious about the transformed dining table. "I'm solving a puzzle, sweetheart," I told her. Sometimes when people aren't honest, you have to find the truth yourself. The breakthrough came during my lunch break on a Tuesday afternoon. I was scrolling through the Millbrook County Register of Deeds website when I found something that made my hands tremble with excitement. Cameron had just purchased another property. A luxury condo in Harbor Point, the same development his company was building. The transaction was filed under Blackstone Holdings LLC, but the financing documents required his personal guarantee. He'd bought a $1.2 million vacation condo while owing Lily $50,400 in support payments. That evening, I did something I'd never done before. I hired a private investigator. Derek Martinez had worked with several nurses whose ex-husbands were hiding assets, and his reputation for finding hidden wealth was legendary among the hospital's single mothers. "I've seen this before," Derek told me during our consultation at a coffee shop downtown. "Rich guys think they're smarter than the system because they can afford lawyers who speak legalese. But money always leaves traces if you know where to look." Derek's investigation revealed the full scope of Cameron's deception. Bank accounts in the Cayman Islands. Investment portfolios managed by offshore firms. Property holdings in 3 different states, all carefully structured to avoid appearing in local court proceedings. Most damning was the discovery that Cameron had transferred $2.3 million to foreign accounts during our divorce proceedings, money that should have been disclosed as marital assets but had been hidden through a complex series of business transactions designed to look like legitimate investment losses. But the piece of evidence that crystallized my new understanding of the situation was simpler and more personal. Derek's surveillance photos showed Cameron at the Blackstone Holdings office, signing papers while Brianna Walsh sat beside him wearing an engagement ring that cost more than I earned in 6 months. Cameron wasn't just avoiding child support, he was financing his new life with the money he owed his daughter. That night, I sat in my car outside Lily's elementary school, watching her through the classroom window during her after-school tutoring session that I could barely afford. She was struggling with long division, frustrated and tired, while her father planned a wedding funded by her unpaid support. The rage that filled me wasn't the hot, explosive anger I'd felt during our divorce. This was something colder and more focused. It was the crystalline clarity that comes when you finally stop hoping people will do the right thing and start planning to make them face consequences. I pulled out my phone and called Jessica Park, my attorney. "Jessica, I need to file for contempt proceedings again, but this time I want asset seizure provisions included." "Natasha, we've tried contempt motions before. Judge Fitzgerald just gives him more time to pay." "Not this time," I said, my voice steady with newfound certainty. "This time I have proof that he's been lying to the court about everything." The transformation was complete. The reasonable ex-wife who believed in fairness and second chances no longer existed. In her place stood a woman who understood that sometimes you have to take justice into your own hands, especially when the system is designed to protect people like Cameron from people like us. Cameron had spent 3 years teaching me that playing by the rules meant losing. It was time to show him what happened when a pediatric nurse stopped playing games and started playing to win. The moment I decided to fight back, Cameron's family closed ranks like a military unit protecting their golden boy. What I hadn't anticipated was how systematically they would try to destroy my credibility and exhaust my resources before I could present my evidence to the court. It started with Patricia Blackstone, Cameron's mother, who had always treated me like hired help even during our marriage. 3 days after I filed the new contempt motion with asset seizure provisions, she called my supervisor at Millbrook General Hospital. "I'm concerned about Natasha Rivera's mental state," Patricia told nursing director Sandra Walsh during what she claimed was a wellness check. "My son is worried she might be having a breakdown that could affect her patient care. She's been making wild accusations about money and sending threatening messages about taking his property." Sandra called me into her office the next morning, her expression carefully neutral but her concern obvious. "Natasha, I need to ask you about some allegations regarding your personal situation affecting your professional judgment." The accusations were expertly crafted to sound reasonable while being impossible to definitively disprove. Patricia claimed I'd been erratic and vengeful in communications with Cameron, though she provided no actual evidence. She suggested my obsession with money was affecting my ability to focus on patient care, despite my spotless professional record. Most damaging was her claim that I'd been using hospital resources for personal legal research, a reference to the one day I'd called in sick to visit the courthouse. Patricia somehow knew about that absence and spun it as evidence of my unprofessional behavior. "I want to be clear," Sandra told me carefully, "that your work here has been exemplary. But I'm required to document any concerns raised about staff members. Just be aware that your personal situation is now part of your employment file." The message was unmistakable, they were building a case to paint me as an unstable ex-wife whose claims couldn't be trusted. If my professional reputation suffered, my credibility in family court would be destroyed along with it. Cameron's next move was even more calculated. He filed a countermotion claiming I was violating the custody agreement by alienating Lily against him and requesting emergency modification of our parenting plan. The filing, submitted by Miranda Cross, included a detailed psychological evaluation request that would require months of expensive testing for both Lily and me. Ms. Rivera has demonstrated increasingly erratic behavior, including harassment of Mr. Blackstone through social media monitoring, hiring private investigators to stalk him, and filing frivolous legal motions designed to interfere with his business operations, the motion read. Mr. Blackstone is concerned for his daughter's emotional welfare given the hostile environment Ms. Rivera has created. The genius of this strategy was its timing. The psychological evaluation process would delay any asset seizure proceedings for at least 6 months, giving Cameron time to move more assets offshore while painting me as the problematic parent. Even if I eventually won, the legal fees would bankrupt me long before we reached a resolution. Jessica Park called me with barely controlled fury after reviewing Cameron's filing. "This is scorched earth litigation, Natasha. They're trying to bury you in procedure and expense. The psychological evaluations alone will cost $15,000, and that's before we factor in the time delays." But Cameron's most vicious attack came through Lily herself, though she didn't understand she was being used as a weapon. After their next weekend visit, Lily came home with questions that could only have been planted by careful manipulation. "Mommy, why are you trying to take Daddy's cars away?" she asked over dinner at our kitchen table. "He said you want to hurt his business because you're angry at him." The sophisticated psychological manipulation behind that question made my stomach turn. Cameron had found a way to make an 8-year-old feel responsible for protecting him from the consequences of his own actions. Lily was now worried that my pursuit of child support was somehow wrong, that wanting him to fulfill his legal obligations made me the villain in their relationship. "Daddy says if you take his cars, he might not be able to see me anymore because he won't have money for his apartment," Lily continued, her little face scrunched with worry. "I told him I don't need new clothes if it means he can't visit." The cruelty of using our daughter's love as a shield against accountability was breathtaking. Cameron had managed to make Lily feel guilty for having needs while positioning himself as the victim of my unreasonable demands. His social media strategy became more aggressive too. Where before he'd simply flaunted his wealth, now he began posting content designed to generate sympathy for his position. Photos of him looking stressed at business meetings with captions about "fighting for my family." Images of him with Lily that emphasized their father-daughter bond while subtly suggesting I was interfering with their relationship. The most infuriating post showed him at a charity event for underprivileged children, writing a check to the same hospital where I worked. "Sometimes the best way to help kids is to support the institutions that care for them," he wrote. Not everyone understands that sustainable charity requires successful businesses. The implication was obvious. He was the responsible parent supporting children's welfare through legitimate business success, while I was the vindictive ex-wife trying to destroy that success for personal gain. Cameron's business associates joined the campaign with their own subtle attacks on my character. At the hospital fundraising gala where several of Blackstone's clients were major donors, I overheard conversations clearly intended for my ears. "Such a shame when divorce makes people vindictive," murmured Dr. Harrison, whose medical practice occupied a building Cameron had developed. "That poor man is just trying to rebuild his life after his ex-wife's demands nearly bankrupted him." The isolation was systematic and effective. Friends who had supported me during the divorce began questioning whether I was taking things too far. Family members suggested I should focus on moving forward instead of dwelling on the past. Even my sister Rachel, who had witnessed Cameron's behavior firsthand, started urging me to accept a reduced settlement and put this behind you. But the pressure campaign had an unexpected effect. It clarified exactly how far Cameron was willing to go to avoid accountability. Every attack on my character, every attempt to weaponize Lily's emotions, every effort to destroy my professional reputation proved that he knew his position was indefensible. If Cameron had really been the struggling businessman Miranda Cross portrayed, he wouldn't have had the resources to orchestrate such an elaborate defense. If his financial claims were legitimate, he wouldn't have needed to resort to character assassination and psychological manipulation. The desperation behind his counterattack told me everything I needed to know. My evidence was damaging enough to threaten his carefully constructed facade. So instead of backing down, I doubled down. I documented every manipulation attempt, every false claim, every effort to use Lily as a weapon against me. Each attack became evidence of his consciousness of guilt. Each lie exposed the depth of his deception. Cameron thought he was intimidating me into submission. Instead, he was proving that a man who would psychologically abuse his own daughter to avoid paying child support was exactly the kind of person who deserved to lose everything he'd stolen from her future. The reasonable ex-wife he'd been manipulating for 3 years was gone forever. In her place stood someone who understood that when you're fighting a sociopath, mercy isn't kindness, it's collaboration with evil. And I was done collaborating. 5. The moment I revealed the true scope of Cameron's hidden assets in Judge Fitzgerald's courtroom, the entire atmosphere shifted like air pressure dropping before a thunderstorm. Miranda Cross, who had spent months confidently arguing that her client was barely surviving financially, suddenly looked like she'd swallowed glass. Your Honor, Jessica Park stood with a 3-inch binder of evidence, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who held a nuclear weapon. We have documentation proving that Mr. Blackstone has systematically hidden over $4.2 million in assets while claiming inability to pay basic child support. Judge Fitzgerald, who had appeared exhausted by our case for months, suddenly leaned forward with sharp attention. Ms. Cross, is your client prepared to respond to these allegations? The first bombshell was the offshore account documentation Derek Martinez had obtained through perfectly legal international banking inquiries. While Cameron had been crying poverty in family court, he'd been moving substantial sums to accounts in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland. The transfer dates corresponded exactly with his court appearances where he'd claimed financial hardship. On March 15 of last year, Jessica continued, while Mr. Blackstone's attorney was arguing that he couldn't afford his full support obligation, he transferred $280,000 to Blackstone International Holdings in Grand Cayman. On June 3, 3 days before our last hearing, he moved another $195,000 offshore. Miranda Cross's face had gone pale, but she maintained her composure. Your Honor, legitimate business operations often require international banking arrangements. These transfers represent normal investment diversification, not hidden assets. Then Jessica dropped the second bomb, the Harbor Point condo purchase. Your Honor, while owing $50,400 in child support to his 8-year-old daughter, Mr. Blackstone purchased a $1.2 million luxury condominium in Harbor Point. The purchase was made through Blackstone Holdings LLC, but required his personal guarantee and was financed with funds from the offshore accounts he's been hiding from this court. The property record spread across the courtroom table like damning evidence at a murder trial. Purchase agreements, financing documents, personal guarantees, all bearing Cameron's signature and dated within the last 6 months of his claimed financial distress. But the third revelation was what made Judge Fitzgerald's jaw visibly tighten. Furthermore, Your Honor, we have evidence that Mr. Blackstone has been using unpaid child support money to fund his engagement to Ms. Brianna Walsh, including a $45,000 engagement ring purchased while he owed his daughter nearly the same amount in support. The receipt from Hartwell Jewelers downtown was crisp and clear, a 2.5-carat diamond engagement ring purchased with a cashier's check drawn on the same offshore account Cameron had claimed didn't exist. The date stamp showed he'd bought it the week after missing his third consecutive support payment. Cameron's carefully constructed mask began cracking. His face flushed red as he whispered urgently to Miranda, who was frantically shuffling through papers trying to find explanations that didn't exist. Ms. Cross, Judge Fitzgerald's voice carried a warning edge. Does your client wish to explain these discrepancies between his sworn financial statements and this evidence? Miranda requested a brief recess, during which I watched through the courtroom windows as she and Cameron had what appeared to be a heated argument in the hallway. Cameron's body language screamed panic, hands gesturing wildly, voice raised enough that court security glanced their way. When they returned, Miranda tried a desperate pivot strategy. Your Honor, while these business transactions may appear substantial, they represent investments that cannot be liquidated without devastating Mr. Blackstone's ability to generate future income. The properties and offshore accounts are encumbered by business debts and contractual obligations that make them unavailable for support payments. Jessica smiled like a shark sensing blood. Your Honor, we anticipated this argument. We have documentation showing that Mr. Blackstone liquidated over $300,000 in similar, encumbered, investments last month to purchase a vintage Aston Martin for his personal collection. The car purchase records were devastating because they proved Cameron could access his hidden wealth whenever he wanted something for himself. The same accounts and investments that were supposedly untouchable for child support had been readily available for a luxury vehicle that served no business purpose. But the moment that broke Cameron's composure completely came when Jessica presented the surveillance photographs Derek had taken. Your Honor, these images were taken last weekend while Mr. Blackstone was claiming he couldn't afford basic child support due to cash flow problems. The photos showed Cameron at an exclusive wine auction, bidding on bottles that cost more than my monthly salary. The auction house receipt showed he'd spent $8,400 on vintage wines, more than 3 times his monthly support obligation, while Lily was asking me why we couldn't afford her art class supplies. Cameron's face went from red to white as the photos circulated. In one particularly damaging image, he was laughing while raising his auction paddle, completely relaxed and obviously wealthy. The timestamp showed it was taken 48 hours after Miranda had filed papers claiming he was under severe financial stress. Your Honor, Cameron finally spoke, his voice strained. There have been some misunderstandings about the nature of these business arrangements. I'm willing to discuss a modified payment schedule that reflects my actual capabilities. Judge Fitzgerald's expression had transformed from weary tolerance to controlled anger. Mr. Blackstone, are you telling this court that your previous financial disclosures were inaccurate? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The question was a legal trap. Admitting the previous filings were false would expose Cameron to perjury charges. Maintaining they were accurate meant contradicting the overwhelming evidence Jessica had presented. Miranda jumped in before Cameron could answer. Your Honor, business finances are complex and evolving. What may have appeared as available assets were actually. Ms. Cross, Judge Fitzgerald interrupted, I've been practicing family law for 26 years. I've seen every variation of hidden assets and financial manipulation. What I see here is not complexity, it's deliberate fraud. The judge's words hung in the air like a death sentence. Cameron's empire of lies was collapsing in real time, and everyone in the courtroom could feel it. Furthermore, Judge Fitzgerald continued, the evidence suggests a pattern of deliberate contempt for this court's orders. Mr. Blackstone has clearly had the means to pay support while choosing to spend equivalent amounts on luxury items and romantic gestures for his fiancée. Cameron tried one last desperate appeal to personal relationships. Your Honor, I love my daughter. I've never wanted to hurt her. If there have been misunderstandings about my finances, I'm committed to resolving them immediately. But Judge Fitzgerald had clearly reached his limit with Cameron's performance. Mr. Blackstone, loving fathers don't force their children to live in poverty while they collect vintage cars and buy engagement rings that cost more than a year of child support. The silence that followed was deafening. Cameron's carefully crafted image as a struggling businessman forced to choose between business survival and family support had been completely destroyed. In its place sat the truth, a wealthy man who had deliberately stolen from his own daughter's future to fund his lifestyle and new relationship. Miranda Cross looked like she was calculating how quickly she could distance herself from a client who had apparently lied to her for months. Cameron sat frozen, perhaps finally understanding that his money and connections couldn't buy his way out of documented evidence and judicial anger. But what came next would prove that destroying his lies was only the beginning of real consequences. The moment Judge Fitzgerald's gavel came down authorizing immediate asset seizure, I didn't feel triumph. I felt the cold satisfaction of a surgical procedure finally removing a cancer. But walking out of that courtroom with legal victory in hand was just the beginning of the most intense week of my life. Natasha, we need to move fast, Jessica warned me as we gathered our evidence boxes in the courthouse hallway. Cameron's going to try to liquidate or transfer everything he can before the sheriff's department can execute the seizure orders. We have maybe 48 hours before his assets start disappearing into offshore accounts we can't touch. The seizure authorization was comprehensive but came with strict procedural requirements. Sheriff's deputies could seize vehicles, freeze bank accounts, and place liens on properties, but only if we could locate the assets quickly enough. Cameron's network of shell companies and hidden holdings meant we needed to strike multiple targets simultaneously before he could move everything beyond our reach. That evening, I transformed my small apartment into a war room that would have impressed military strategists. Derek Martinez arrived with updated surveillance reports and asset locations. Jessica brought legal documents and coordination schedules. My sister Rachel came to watch Lily, who was sleeping over at a friend's house, blissfully unaware that her father's world was about to collapse. The Porsche is usually parked at his Clearwater Heights mansion overnight, Derek reported, spreading maps across my dining table. The Ferrari stays at the Blackstone Holdings office downtown. The Aston Martin is in a private garage facility on Maple Street that he rents under a corporate name. Jessica had coordinated with Sheriff's Deputy Marcus Chin, who specialized in asset seizure cases. The timing has to be perfect, she explained. If Cameron gets wind that we're seizing one asset, he'll immediately move to protect the others. We need simultaneous strikes at 6 a.m. tomorrow, the mansion, the office building, and the storage facility. But the most crucial element was freezing his bank accounts before he could transfer the funds internationally. Jessica had convinced Judge Fitzgerald to issue emergency freezing orders for all accounts connected to Cameron's social security number and business entities. The orders would be served on every major bank in the county at exactly 9 a.m., when business hours began. I barely slept that night, lying awake calculating every detail that could go wrong. Cameron was intelligent and well-connected. There was no guarantee he hadn't already anticipated this possibility and moved to protect his assets. Worse, his family's political connections might give him advance warning through courthouse contacts. At 5:30 a.m., my phone buzzed with a text from Derek, subject on the move early. Porsche leaving mansion now. My heart hammered as I called Jessica. Cameron's not following his usual pattern. He's already up and moving. Stay calm, she said, though I could hear tension in her voice. Deputy Chen's team is in position at all 3 locations. Even if Cameron's spooked, he can't be everywhere at once. The next hour unfolded like a precisely choreographed dance of legal enforcement. Derek provided real-time updates as he followed Cameron's silver Porsche through early morning traffic toward downtown Millbrook. At 6:15 a.m., subject parking at Blackstone Holdings office. Getting out with briefcase and laptop bag. Looks like he's planning to work early today. At 6:18 a.m., sheriff's vehicles approaching the office building. 2 units, no sirens. At 6:20 a.m., contact made. Subject appears shocked. They're showing him the seizure orders. I sat in my Honda Civic 3 blocks away from Cameron's office building, my hands gripping the steering wheel as Derek narrated the scene through our phone connection. Cameron's arguing with the deputies, but they're not having it. One officer is taking photos of the Porsche while another is attaching the seizure notice to the windshield. Cameron just pulled out his phone, probably calling Miranda. The Ferrari seizure at the Maple Street garage facility happened simultaneously. The storage company manager, faced with official court orders, opened the private unit without resistance. Deputies found not just the red Ferrari California, but also a third vehicle Cameron had never disclosed, a vintage Jaguar E-Type worth at least $150,000. Jackpot, Jessica texted me. The garage seizure found the hidden Jaguar plus boxes of financial records Cameron was obviously planning to destroy. Derek was right about him moving assets early, he was trying to clean out the storage unit. But Cameron's morning was about to get much worse. At 9:03 a.m., the banking freeze orders hit every major financial institution in Millbrook County like coordinated lightning strikes. Within minutes, Cameron's access to over $800,000 in local accounts was completely blocked. His credit cards stopped working. His automatic bill payments bounced. His carefully maintained lifestyle ground to an immediate halt. Derek, still maintaining surveillance, reported Cameron's increasing panic as the morning progressed. He's made at least 12 phone calls in the last hour. Keeps pacing around the office building parking lot. tried to get in the Porsche twice but saw the seizure notice and backed away. The most satisfying moment came when Cameron apparently tried to use his Platinum American Express card to pay for breakfast at the downtown cafe where he held business meetings. The card was declined because the bank account funding it had been frozen. Derek watched from across the street as Cameron argued with the waitress, his face red with embarrassment as other customers stared. "He's realizing his entire financial infrastructure just collapsed," Derek reported. "No access to vehicles, no access to money, no way to conduct business as usual. He's trapped." But Cameron's family wasn't going down without a fight. By 10 a.m., Patricia Blackstone had mobilized her own resources. She called Judge Fitzgerald's office demanding an emergency hearing to challenge the seizure orders. She contacted the sheriff's department threatening lawsuits for harassment of a prominent businessman. She even tried calling Sandra Walsh at the hospital again, claiming I was using insider information to orchestrate a vendetta against her son. None of it worked. The evidence was too overwhelming, the legal procedures too carefully followed, the court orders too comprehensive to challenge on procedural grounds. Miranda Cross, meanwhile, had gone into damage control mode. She filed an emergency appeal, but appeals courts don't typically reverse asset seizures when there's documented evidence of hidden wealth and contempt of court orders. She also began preparing what lawyers call a tactical withdrawal, positioning herself to exit the case before Cameron's legal problems became her professional liability. The final blow to Cameron's resistance came at 2:15 p.m. when Derek reported movement at the Harbor Point condo. County Assessor's Office just arrived with seizure paperwork for the luxury condo. They're changing the locks and posting notices. Cameron won't be able to access his secret vacation property anymore. By the end of that first day, Cameron had lost access to over $2 million in assets, including 3 luxury vehicles, multiple bank accounts, and 2 properties. But more importantly, his ability to continue hiding wealth had been completely destroyed. Every shell company, every offshore connection, every financial trick he'd used to avoid supporting Lily was now under court scrutiny. That evening, I sat in my apartment reading Derek's final report of the day while Lily did her homework at the kitchen table, still unaware of the seismic shift in her father's situation. Cameron spent the afternoon at Miranda Cross's office, presumably planning their next move, Derek had written. But his body language suggests a man who's realized he's lost control of the situation. The confident, arrogant businessman I'd been following for months looked defeated when he left the law office at 5:30 p.m. Justice, it turned out, wasn't just about winning in court. It was about watching someone who had systematically stolen from his own child finally face consequences that money and connections couldn't eliminate. And this was only day 1. The counterattack began exactly 12 hours after the asset seizures, and it was more vicious than anything I had anticipated. Cameron's desperation transformed him from a manipulative ex-husband into something far more dangerous, a cornered predator willing to destroy everything rather than accept accountability. At 6:47 a.m., my phone exploded with notifications. Cameron had launched a coordinated social media campaign designed to paint me as a vindictive ex-wife who had manipulated the legal system to steal his property. The posts were sophisticated, clearly crafted by a public relations professional, and devastatingly effective at first glance. Woke up to find my cars seized and bank accounts frozen because my ex-wife convinced a judge I'm hiding money, his Facebook post read, accompanied by a photo of him looking devastated outside the courthouse. Sometimes the family court system punishes success and rewards spite. Praying for my daughter who's caught in the middle of this madness. The post had been shared 43 times within an hour, generating hundreds of comments from people who knew nothing about our case but were happy to pile on with opinions about gold-digging ex-wives and corrupt family courts. Cameron's business associates and social connections amplified the narrative, creating an echo chamber of sympathy that made him look like the victim. But the social media blitz was just covering fire for his real offensive, a systematic attempt to destroy my professional reputation and personal relationships. At 8:15 a.m., Patricia Blackstone called Millbrook General Hospital again, but this time she had company. Dr. Richard Hartwell, whose medical practice occupied one of Cameron's prime real estate developments, contacted the hospital administration with concerns about staff stability affecting patient care quality. We've heard troubling reports about a nurse using hospital resources for personal vendettas, Dr. Hartwell told hospital administrator Jennifer Walsh. As major donors to your children's wing, we feel obligated to ensure that personal drama doesn't compromise the professional environment. The message was unmistakably clear. Cameron's business network was prepared to threaten the hospital's funding if I wasn't disciplined or removed. Jennifer Walsh called me into her office at 10 a.m., her expression carefully neutral but her stress obvious. "Natasha, I need you to understand the position this puts the hospital in," she said, closing her office door. "We have major donors questioning your professionalism while you're involved in highly public legal battles. The board is asking if your personal situation is affecting your ability to maintain our standards." The allegations were carefully crafted lies designed to sound plausible while being impossible to definitively disprove. They claimed I'd been distracted and emotional during patient care, though no specific incidents were cited. They suggested I'd been using work time for personal legal matters, referencing phone calls that had actually been made during my lunch breaks. Most damaging was their assertion that my vendetta against a prominent community member reflected poor judgment that could affect patient safety. The implication was that someone unstable enough to attack Cameron Blackstone might also be unreliable in medical emergencies. "I want to be clear that your direct supervisors have reported no problems with your performance," Jennifer continued. "But the perception issues are becoming a liability for the hospital. I'm required to place a letter of concern in your personnel file and mandate counseling sessions to address work-life balance." The professional humiliation burned, but it was nothing compared to what came next. At 2:30 p.m., while I was struggling through my hospital shift under the weight of administrative scrutiny, Cameron filed an emergency motion for full custody of Lily. The court filing, submitted by Miranda Cross, was a masterpiece of legal manipulation that reframed the asset seizure as evidence of my mental instability. Ms. Rivera has demonstrated escalating obsessive and vindictive behavior that poses a direct threat to the minor child's emotional welfare, the motion read. Her systematic harassment of Mr. Blackstone, including hiring private investigators to stalk him and manipulating court proceedings to seize his legitimate business assets, indicates a deteriorating mental state incompatible with responsible parenting. The filing included affidavits from Patricia Blackstone and several of Cameron's business associates, all swearing that they had witnessed my erratic behavior and inappropriate fixation on Cameron's finances. The statements were carefully worded to sound concerned rather than vindictive, painting a picture of worried community members reluctantly stepping forward to protect a child. Most cruel was the inclusion of Lily's own innocent statements, taken out of context and twisted into evidence against me. Her comment about "mommy working on papers all the time" became proof that I was neglecting her emotional needs. Her question about why Daddy couldn't visit anymore was presented as evidence that I was poisoning her relationship with Cameron. The emergency custody hearing was scheduled for Friday afternoon, just 3 days away. If Cameron succeeded, I would lose Lily while he regained access to his seized assets through claims that he needed them to provide proper care for his daughter. Jessica called me at the hospital, her voice tight with controlled fury. "This is exactly what I was afraid of. Cameron's using the legal system like a weapon, throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks. The custody motion is probably unwinnable for him, but it forces us to divert resources from protecting the asset seizures." The strategy was diabolical in its effectiveness. While I spent money and time defending against the custody challenge, Cameron could work on moving his remaining assets beyond our reach. Even if he lost the custody battle, the delay would give him opportunities to hide wealth we hadn't yet discovered. But Cameron's most personal attack came that evening when Lily returned from her after-school program with tears in her eyes and questions that could only have been planted by careful manipulation. "Mommy, Emma's mom asked if it's true that you're trying to make Daddy homeless," Lily said over dinner, her 8-year-old voice heavy with confusion. "She said her daddy works with my daddy and that taking people's cars is stealing." The playground gossip network had been weaponized against us. Cameron's business associates had instructed their wives to spread carefully crafted versions of our story through school parent networks. Instead of deadbeat father refuses to pay child support, the narrative had become vindictive ex-wife destroys successful businessman's life. "Mrs. Patterson asked if you're okay," Lily continued, referencing her teacher. "She said some parents are worried about you because divorce makes people do crazy things sometimes." The systematic character assassination was working. Teachers were questioning my stability. Parents were avoiding me at school pickup. Even neighbors in our apartment complex had started treating me differently, their friendly waves replaced by cautious nods and whispered conversations. That night, after Lily fell asleep, I sat in my kitchen surrounded by legal documents and Derek's surveillance reports, feeling more isolated than I had since our divorce. Cameron's counterattack had transformed me from a sympathetic single mother seeking justice into a controversial figure whose very presence made people uncomfortable. But buried in the flood of attacks and manipulations, I found something Cameron hadn't intended to reveal: the complete panic behind his desperate offensive. Every assault on my character, every attempt to discredit the evidence, every effort to flip the narrative proved that he knew the asset seizures were legitimate and devastating. A man with nothing to hide wouldn't have launched such a comprehensive campaign to destroy the person exposing him. More importantly, the sheer scale of resources Cameron was deploying: PR professionals, legal teams, business network pressure, family coordination, demonstrated exactly the kind of wealth and influence he'd been claiming he didn't possess. His counterattack was inadvertently proving my case better than any evidence Derek could gather. I pulled out my phone and texted Jessica, "Document everything. Every attack, every threat, every resource he's using. He's destroying his own defense." Cameron thought he was intimidating me into retreat. Instead, he was providing a real-time demonstration of the financial power and social connections he'd sworn under oath that he didn't have. And tomorrow, I would start using his own desperation against him. Cameron's estranged uncle, who had been quietly watching the family drama unfold from the sidelines for months. His phone call came at 7:23 a.m. on Thursday morning, just as I was preparing for another day of defending myself against Cameron's character assassination campaign. "Ms. Rivera? This is Thomas Blackstone, Cameron's uncle. I believe we need to talk immediately. There are things about this situation that you don't know, but should." My first instinct was suspicion. After 3 days of coordinated attacks from Cameron's family and business network, any Blackstone reaching out felt like another manipulation attempt. But something in Thomas's voice, a weary resignation mixed with genuine urgency, made me agree to meet him at a coffee shop downtown in an hour. Thomas Blackstone looked nothing like his nephew. Where Cameron was polished and arrogant, Thomas appeared weathered and straightforward. He wore a simple work shirt and jeans, his calloused hands wrapped around a coffee cup as he waited at a corner table away from other customers. "I'd been watching this family destroy itself for years," he began without preamble. "Cameron's father, my brother Michael, built Blackstone Real Estate through hard work and ethical business practices. What Cameron's done with that legacy is an insult to everything our family once stood for." The story Thomas told over the next hour fundamentally changed my understanding of the Blackstone family dynamics and provided crucial context for Cameron's behavior. Michael never intended for Cameron to inherit control of the business, Thomas revealed. He knew his son was irresponsible with money and lacked the character for ethical leadership. The original will left the company in a trust with me as executor, designed to provide Cameron with income while preventing him from destroying the business. But Patricia Blackstone had manipulated the situation through a combination of legal pressure and emotional blackmail, convincing Michael to change his will during his final illness. She convinced my dying brother that excluding Cameron would destroy the family legacy. Patricia wanted control of the company wealth, and she knew Cameron would be easier to manipulate than I would be. Thomas pulled out a manila envelope containing documents I'd never seen before. "These are copies of the original business records from before Cameron took control. The financial statements Miranda Cross has been presenting to the court don't match the company's actual performance." The documents revealed that Blackstone Real Estate Development was far more profitable than Cameron's court filing suggested. Instead of the struggling business portrayed in family court, the company was generating millions in annual profit through the downtown revitalization projects and harbor development contracts. "Cameron's been using 2 sets of books," Thomas explained. "The real records show enormous profits that he funnels through shell companies to avoid taxes and court judgments. The fake records he presents in legal proceedings make the business appear barely solvent." But Thomas's most damaging revelation involved the Harbor Point development project specifically. That $1.2 million condo Cameron bought? It's not just a luxury purchase. It's part of a money laundering scheme he's been running through the Harbor Point project. Blackstone Development gets city contracts for affordable housing units, but Cameron sells them as luxury condos and pockets the difference through his shell companies. The implications were staggering. Cameron wasn't just hiding assets to avoid child support, he was committing fraud against the city of Millbrook by misrepresenting government-subsidized housing projects for personal profit. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, struggling to process the magnitude of what Thomas was revealing. His answer was simple and devastating: because I can't watch him steal from his own daughter anymore. And because Patricia threatened me last week that if I didn't support their family court strategy, she'd have Cameron cut me out of all future business dealings. The family pressure campaign that had targeted me was also being used against Thomas, who had worked for Blackstone Development for 15 years and depended on the income for his retirement security. Patricia had essentially ordered him to choose between his financial survival and his conscience. "I'm 62 years old," Thomas continued. "I should be focused on my own future, not cleaning up Cameron's messes. But I can't retire knowing that little girl is being robbed by her own father while he destroys everything my brother built." Thomas's support came with concrete assistance that immediately shifted the balance of power in our legal battle. He provided access to the real financial records that proved Cameron's court filings were fraudulent. He offered to testify about the company's actual profitability and Cameron's asset-hiding strategies. Most importantly, he revealed the location of additional hidden assets that Derek's investigation had missed. "There's a storage facility in Riverside County where Cameron keeps a boat and additional vehicles registered under shell company names," Thomas disclosed. "He also has safety deposit boxes at 3 different banks containing cash, jewelry, and bearer bonds worth over $300,000. But Thomas's most valuable contribution was insight into Cameron's psychology and strategic planning. Cameron's entire identity is built around the image of success and control," Thomas explained. "The asset seizures haven't just hurt him financially, they've attacked his core sense of self. That's why he's lashing out so desperately. He'd rather destroy everything than admit he's been wrong." Thomas warned me that Cameron's counterattack would likely escalate further as he became more desperate. "Patricia is already talking about having Cameron declare bankruptcy to protect his remaining assets. They're also considering moving him out of state temporarily to avoid further court proceedings." This intelligence allowed Jessica and me to prepare countermeasures before Cameron could execute his escape plans. We filed motions to prevent asset transfers and requested court orders requiring Cameron to surrender his passport to prevent him from fleeing with liquid assets to offshore accounts. But Thomas's support had immediate psychological benefits that were just as important as the legal advantages. For the first time since Cameron's counterattack began, someone from his own family was publicly validating my position and confirming that the evidence against him was legitimate. "I'll be attending the custody hearing on Friday," Thomas told me as our meeting concluded. "Cameron doesn't know I'm here, but he's about to discover that not everyone in the Blackstone family is willing to enable his behavior." The shift from isolation to having a powerful ally completely changed my tactical position. Instead of defending against attacks from all directions, I now had insider information about Cameron's strategies and access to evidence that could destroy his credibility permanently. That evening, I called Lily's school and requested a meeting with her teacher and the principal. Instead of hiding from the gossip campaign Cameron's associates had launched, I decided to present the truth directly to the people who mattered most in Lily's daily life. "I want you to understand what's really happening with our family situation," I told Mrs. Henderson and Principal Martinez. "My daughter's father has been systematically avoiding child support while spreading false information about our legal proceedings." I provided them with copies of the court orders showing Cameron's contempt findings and asset seizure authorizations. I explained the difference between pursuing legitimate legal remedies and the vindictive behavior Cameron's supporters were describing. Most importantly, I ensured that school personnel understood Lily was not in any danger and that the legal proceedings were designed to protect her welfare, not harm her father unnecessarily. The meeting concluded with both educators expressing support for Lily and offering to help counter any negative narratives affecting her school experience. By Thursday evening, Cameron's coordinated attack campaign was beginning to backfire. His desperate overreach had exposed him to scrutiny from family members like Thomas, who had previously remained neutral. His systematic character assassination attempts were generating questions about why someone supposedly struggling financially could afford such an elaborate public relations offensive. Most importantly, his escalating behavior was providing Judge Fitzgerald with clear evidence of consciousness of guilt and deliberate contempt for court authority. The hunter was about to become the hunted. The final revelation that would shatter Cameron's world forever came not from courtroom drama or legal maneuvering, but from a single yellow document Thomas Blackstone handed me in Judge Fitzgerald's chambers 30 minutes before the emergency custody hearing began. "I've been carrying this burden for 8 years, Thomas said, his weathered hands trembling slightly as he opened a sealed envelope. "Cameron's father made me promise never to reveal this unless his son's behavior became truly destructive. I think stealing from his own daughter qualifies." The document inside was a handwritten letter from Michael Blackstone, dated just 6 months before his death from cancer. But it wasn't just any letter, it was a detailed confession about the true ownership structure of Blackstone real estate development that would prove Cameron had been committing massive fraud for years. "My son Cameron believes he inherited full control of the family business," Michael's letter began in his careful handwriting. "This is not true. Due to his demonstrated financial irresponsibility and gambling problems, I structured the company ownership through a complex trust that maintains him as a salaried employee with management responsibilities, not the actual owner." Judge Fitzgerald read the letter with growing astonishment while Jessica and I exchanged glances of barely contained excitement. Cameron and Miranda Cross, waiting in the hallway outside chambers, had no idea that the foundation of their entire legal strategy was about to collapse. "The true owners of Blackstone Real Estate Development," the letter continued, "are my brother Thomas Blackstone, 45% ownership, and a charitable trust established for Cameron's future children, 55% ownership. Cameron receives substantial salary and bonuses that should provide more than adequate income to support his family, but he has no authority to make major business decisions or access the company's primary assets without trustee approval." The implications were staggering. Every court filing Cameron had submitted claiming ownership of a struggling business was fraudulent. Every asset he'd claimed was encumbered by business obligations was actually controlled by trustees who had been deliberately kept unaware of the family court proceedings. Most damning, the salary and bonuses he received from the trust, administered through Thomas, were more than sufficient to pay child support, proving his claims of financial hardship were outright lies. "Thomas has been managing the trust conservatively to protect Cameron's long-term interests," Michael's letter explained. "He's been paying Cameron approximately $180,000 annually in salary and bonuses while building substantial reserves for Cameron's children's education and welfare. Cameron has been told these payments represent profit distributions from his successful business management, not trust distributions he's legally entitled to receive." Thomas looked directly at me with eyes full of regret. "I've been enabling this charade for 8 years because I thought protecting Cameron's ego would eventually help him mature into responsibility. Instead, I've been funding his gambling, his affairs, and his abandonment of Lily while he pretended to be a self-made businessman." But the letter contained one more revelation that would prove Cameron had been systematically stealing from his own daughter's future. "The charitable trust established for Cameron's children," Michael had written, "currently contains $2.8 million in assets specifically designated for their education, healthcare, and welfare needs. Thomas has been instructed to distribute funds directly for child-related expenses when Cameron proves unwilling or unable to meet his parental obligations. Lily had been living in relative poverty while her father controlled access to nearly $3 million that legally belonged to her welfare trust. Cameron hadn't just been avoiding his support obligations, he'd been preventing her from accessing money specifically set aside for her needs by her grandfather's careful estate planning. Why didn't you intervene before now? I asked Thomas, though my tone was more curiosity than accusation. Because Cameron convinced me that family court judgments were temporary setbacks that he was working to resolve, Thomas replied. He claimed you were being unreasonable and that he needed time to restructure his finances. I believed him because I wanted to believe that my nephew wasn't capable of stealing from his own child. Judge Fitzgerald set the letter aside and looked directly at Thomas. Mr. Blackstone, are you prepared to assume active control of this trust and ensure that the child receives her entitled support? Yes, Your Honor. I should have done this years ago. The judge nodded grimly. Then let's bring Mr. Cameron Blackstone and his attorney in here so they can explain how they've been committing fraud against this court for 3 years. When Cameron entered Judge Fitzgerald's chambers, his confident demeanor suggested he expected the custody hearing to proceed as planned. Miranda Cross carried herself with the professional composure of someone who believed her client's financial documentation was solid and defensible. Mr. Blackstone, Judge Fitzgerald began without preamble, I have some questions about your business ownership claims and financial disclosures. Cameron's face shifted to mild concern. Of course, Your Honor. I'm happy to clarify any confusion about our previous filings. Judge Fitzgerald slid Michael's letter across the conference table. Please read this document and then explain to me how you've been claiming ownership of a business you don't actually own. The transformation in Cameron's expression was immediate and devastating. The color drained from his face as he read his father's words, his hands beginning to shake as he realized the magnitude of his exposed deception. Miranda Cross leaned over to read the letter, her professional composure cracking as she understood that her client had been lying to her for months. Your Honor, Cameron stammered, there must be some misunderstanding about the business structure. My father and I discussed. Mr. Blackstone, Judge Fitzgerald interrupted, this letter is dated 6 months before your father's death and specifically addresses your tendency to misrepresent financial situations. Did you know about this trust structure when you filed your financial affidavits claiming business ownership? The question was a legal trap. Admitting knowledge of the trust would prove deliberate perjury. Denying knowledge would mean confessing ignorance about his own claimed business empire. Miranda Cross jumped in before Cameron could answer. Your Honor, we need time to review these allegations and consult with our client about previously undisclosed family business arrangements. Ms. Cross, Judge Fitzgerald's voice carried barely controlled anger, your client has been collecting $180,000 annually from a trust while claiming poverty in my courtroom. His daughter has been living on a nurse's salary while sitting on a $2.8 million trust established specifically for her welfare. How much time do you need to explain systematic fraud? Cameron tried one last desperate appeal. Your Honor, I never intended to mislead the court. The business arrangements are complex, and I may have misunderstood some aspects of the ownership structure. Judge Fitzgerald's response was swift and final. Mr. Blackstone, intention is irrelevant when the result is stealing from your own child. This hearing is adjourned while I consider whether to refer this matter to the district attorney for criminal prosecution. The custody challenge that was supposed to destroy my credibility had instead exposed the depth of Cameron's deception and provided the final evidence needed to ensure Lily would never want for anything again. But more importantly, it had revealed that sometimes justice requires patience, because the truth has a way of surfacing when people finally find the courage to speak it. 6 months later, I stood in the parking lot of Lily's new private school, watching her run toward me with a backpack full of art supplies and a smile that hadn't dimmed since the day everything changed. The transformation in our lives had been so complete that sometimes I had to remind myself it was real, not some elaborate dream born from years of desperate hoping. The silver Porsche 911 that had once symbolized Cameron's arrogance now sat in my driveway, legally transferred to me as partial satisfaction of the $127,000 in back child support, interest, and penalties Judge Fitzgerald had calculated. I'd sold it within a week, using the proceeds to establish Lily's college fund and move us into a beautiful 2-bedroom house in the Oakmont Hills neighborhood where she could walk to school and play in a backyard that was actually ours. Cameron himself was serving an 18-month sentence in minimum security federal prison for tax evasion and contempt of court. The district attorney's investigation, triggered by Judge Fitzgerald's referral, had uncovered a web of financial crimes extending far beyond hidden child support. The fake business records, offshore tax sheltering, and fraudulent court filings had constituted a pattern of systematic fraud that prosecutors couldn't ignore. But Cameron's incarceration was almost secondary to the complete collapse of his carefully constructed life. Patricia Blackstone had disowned him after Thomas assumed control of the family trust and began cooperating with federal investigators. The mansion in Clearwater Heights had been sold to pay restitution to the IRS. His engagement to Brianna Walsh had ended when she discovered the engagement ring was purchased with embezzled funds and could be seized by federal marshals. Mommy, guess what? Lily bubbled as she climbed into our reliable but modest Honda Civic. Mrs. Chen says I have natural artistic talent and wants me to enter the county art competition. Can I? please. Of course, sweetheart, I said, pulling away from the school and marveling at how different this conversation was from the ones we'd had a year ago when I couldn't afford basic art supplies. The trust fund Thomas now administered on Lily's behalf ensured she would never again ask permission for opportunities that other children took for granted. Her education expenses, medical care, extracurricular activities, and future college costs were fully covered by the $2.8 million inheritance her grandfather had wisely protected from Cameron's destructive impulses. But perhaps more importantly, Lily was finally free from the psychological manipulation that had poisoned her relationship with both parents. Without Cameron's constant attempts to use her as a weapon against me or a shield for himself, she was developing into the confident, happy child she'd always been meant to be. Thomas had become an unexpected blessing in our lives, serving not just as trustee but as the grandfather figure Lily had never experienced. He visited every other Sunday, bringing homemade cookies and stories about the ethical business practices his brother Michael had instilled in the family company. Through him, Lily was learning about her heritage without the toxic narcissism that had defined Cameron's version of family legacy. Uncle Thomas says Grandpa Michael would be proud that his money is helping me grow up strong and smart, Lily had told me recently, and the peace in her voice when she spoke about family connections was something I'd never heard during Cameron's manipulative visits. My own professional life had undergone a renaissance that surprised everyone at Millbrook General Hospital. The stress of constant financial worry and legal battles had been consuming more of my emotional energy than I'd realized. With those pressures lifted, my patient care had reached new levels of excellence that resulted in a promotion to charge nurse and a substantial salary increase. More satisfying was the respect I'd gained from colleagues who had witnessed the entire ordeal. Far from seeing me as the vindictive ex-wife Cameron's propaganda campaign had portrayed, the medical staff recognized someone who had fought systematically and successfully for justice. Several nurses facing their own deadbeat parent situations had sought my advice, and I'd been able to connect them with Jessica Park and Derek Martinez. Jessica had become more than my attorney, she'd become a genuine friend who specialized in complex asset recovery cases. The success of our strategy against Cameron had built her reputation as someone who could navigate sophisticated financial hiding schemes and deliver results for determined clients. She'd leveraged our case into a practice that focused specifically on high-net-worth individuals trying to avoid family court obligations. Derek Martinez had similarly expanded his investigation business, developing expertise in corporate fraud detection that extended far beyond divorce cases. The evidence he'd gathered against Cameron had impressed federal investigators enough that he now consulted regularly with white-collar crime units across the state. But the most profound change was internal, the restoration of my faith in the possibility that persistence and courage could ultimately overcome systematic manipulation and institutional indifference. For 3 years, I'd felt like I was fighting alone against opponents with unlimited resources and sophisticated strategies. The victory had proven that truth, carefully documented and strategically presented, could defeat even the most elaborate deceptions. The key had been understanding that Cameron's greatest weakness was his narcissistic need to maintain the appearance of success. His refusal to live modestly or acknowledge limitations had provided the evidence trail that ultimately destroyed him. If he'd been willing to actually reduce his lifestyle and pay child support consistently, he might have maintained his deceptions indefinitely. Instead, his compulsive need to flaunt wealth while claiming poverty had created the contradictions that made his fraud obvious to anyone willing to investigate thoroughly. That evening, as I tucked Lily into her new bedroom with its art supplies organized neatly on a desk that was actually large enough for her projects, she looked up at me with the serious expression that meant she was processing something important. "Mommy, I'm glad Daddy can't come to my art show next week." The comment might have shocked me a year ago, but I understood what she meant. Cameron's visits had always been performances designed to serve his emotional needs rather than hers. His absence allowed her to enjoy achievements without worrying about whether they would become tools in adult conflicts she couldn't understand. "You don't have to worry about any of that anymore," I assured her. "Your art show is about celebrating your talent, not managing grown-up problems." As I turned off her bedroom light, I reflected on the most important lesson our ordeal had taught both of us, that justice isn't something that happens to you. It's something you create through determination, evidence, and the courage to demand that systems work as they're supposed to. Cameron had spent years believing that wealth and connections made him untouchable. he discovered that patience, preparation, and persistence could overcome any advantage when wielded by someone fighting for their child's future. And Lily would grow up knowing that her mother had refused to accept injustice, even when fighting back seemed impossible. That knowledge, more than any trust fund, would serve her well throughout her life. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.